So hi friend, welcome to the show. My name is Bernie from Tiger Resilience, where we offer addiction solutions so that any family member who is struggling with a loved one who is dealing with an addiction can find a way and a path to heal and also to unify your family once again. And today I have the absolute pleasure and privilege of introducing a very stout professional, an individual who's accomplished so much in his life, and I'm going to let him talk more about his background. But this is Matt Paknis, who has written a book a few years back called Successful Leaders Aren't Bullies, and he specializes in working with workplace bullies. So we're going to talk a lot about the topic today, which is bullies and the correlation between, active bullies and what that does to the victim or the person who is suffering from that process. And he's going to share on his experience from working in the professional community, and we're also going to tie that back into how that affects and is part of substance use, as well as mental health and some other things too that you may not be aware of. So Matt, I'd like to thank you so much for doing this, and welcome to the show.
Thanks, Bernie. Great to be back. Great to talk to you again, I should say.
Yes, indeed.
As always.
So you want to introduce yourself a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. In 2017, I was asked by a publishing house. I'd been working since the early 90s in corporations. Primarily, I was first hired. I had gone to Brown and gotten a degree in organizational behavior and economics, and studied some architecture as well. And then I got into football coaching, and I coached for 6 years. And one of the places I happened to coach was Penn State, and came back, got an MBA at the University of Rhode Island, and started doing corporate retreats and programs to help companies cultivate really healthy cultures and work environments, and real productive work environments, thriving work environments. And that led to me putting together a 50-hour certificate program in practice management at Brown with my former faculty advisor, and that ran for about 12 years at night. And during the day, I was working as an internal management consultant for a large financial services company. And then I was recruited to do the same type of work at a big telecommunications company. And with all my free time, I was sort of building up a private client base. And then a saturation point hit around 2003, and I was approached by a couple companies with really attractive consulting contracts. And I did that for another 15 years or so. And I was contacted by a publisher who wanted to see if I could write a book. They gave me the title of the book, and you just saw it: Successful Leaders Aren't Bullies. Bernie, did I lose you?
No, I'm still here. I'm just
sorry.
Yep.
The screen changed. I'm sorry.
No problem at all. You may see that a little bit.
All right. Yeah, good. I wrote the book, and it was released by Simon & Schuster in September of 2018. December of 2018, I was sued by a former client who apparently identified so strongly with the bullying traits and the predatory traits that were in the book that they felt as though I was writing about them, even though anybody that read the book outside of them would have no clue about who I was writing about.
Wow.
Fortunately, after 4 years, that case was just dropped just a couple of weeks ago.
Yes.
And so, they approached my publisher, threatened, and my publisher signed over the rights of the book to me, and so it stopped printed. So, we're gearing up for a new release, so to speak.
Excellent.
It's gotten a lot of really good feedback based on the copies that were released and read from all around the world, really. And I've built up a pretty good, base of people that are either experiencing bullies or witnessing it, or maybe are married to or related to someone who's being bullied in the workplace.
Yes.
And it's really a support network where we offer actual viable solutions and recommendations on how to change a culture and how to address abuse and bullying in the workplace.
Yes.
How to identify it, address it, prevent it, and then transcend it, overcome it. So that's really my focus. And then obviously I know we're talking today about more schoolyard bullying and childhood bullying, which we've all probably been exposed to as we grow, as
Yes.
we've grown in different neighborhoods and different backgrounds. Now I think the internet gives people a lot more opportunity to be mean to one another,
Yes,
and
indeed.
try to control one another in one way or another. So we can talk a little bit about that. But
Sure.
that's my general background. I've worked with I think I've had over 10,000 engagements with different corporations around the world.
Wow, amazing.
I've worked with over 1,000 companies. So, like I said, the book is case-based based on experiences that I had with these different organizations. And, but it's all, it's all protected. I changed the identities, and I,
Sure.
really made it so no one really knows who I'm writing.
Sure. And I did read the book, and there a lot of it is really the anecdote of the story and some of the takeaway, but obviously you're not able to really discern between who is what character in that. And that was obviously incredible the way you had written the book itself. So so I certainly encourage the audience to absolutely please check that out. And Amazon still, I think, Matt, you can find that on.
Oh yeah, Amazon's got it. Unfortunately, there aren't a lot of copies out there, so
Okay.
I think the original cost would have been around $18. And I think due to supply and demand, it's a little more expensive. But I think there's going to be a new release relatively soon.
Okay.
And it should get some decent traction and publicity, because basically this company used the federal legal system in the United States to bully me.
Yes.
So it's like a David and Goliath story.
It is, and that in itself would certainly be an episode, because it was an amazing story, just knowing the back end of that too as well. And as well, I will have in the description in the feed here, you will definitely have the information about the book, as well as Matt Paknis link as well. So if you'd like to learn more about him and the book, you'll find all that information will be in our description. So let me get started. We're going to talk a little bit about bullying in a sense. And I want to kind of preface this first before we kind of get started. The challenge that I had found, and I just shared this with Matt, with bullying, is that it's kind of an insidious activity that happens to a lot of people, and they're not even aware of it, really, almost like as if it goes under the radar from their own scope of what they're dealing with through their lives. And I was working with a gentleman a little while back. He was in his early 40s, and he was having a challenge with alcoholism, and he was a professional, worked hard, had a family, was trying to do all the right things, but really struggled. And, the challenge was that there had to have been something that happened in his life because of the way he was really drinking at that point. And I went and sat down and we worked together. And as I learned more about him and his history, he came from good parents. He had a good life. He went to school, went to college, and there was no indicators of anything that really kind of went wrong. And then we continued to kind of delve into his background and trying to look for something, because it was really unusual to not find that one element. And then he shared that he had a very severe bullying episodes when he was younger for about 2.5 years. And it was an extremely, violent, emotional, almost stalking, to the point where, he had suppressed this. Suppress this memory. And it really is, in my experience, and you can see Dr. Matt, you can find him on the YouTube channels, and he talks a lot about it. And it's something I've experienced for years, is that most of the people are dealing with substance use challenges. There's always a trauma event somewhere in that picture that kind of was part of that springboard that brought into that aspects of that addiction in itself. So, and let me clarify, not everyone who has had a trauma event becomes addicted, but I can certainly say on the reverse that everyone I've ever worked with that had a challenge with substance use disorder absolutely had a history of trauma in their background, in a sense. So with that,
the CDC, I know we're going to probably talk about that, but CDC, Kaiser Permanente, I think acute childhood experiences, where, I think they identified 10 events or experiences that, if a child experiences 4 or more, and doesn't address it sometime in their life and, process it and work through it, it cuts about a quarter of your life. Your normal lifespan becomes 60.
Wow.
Now, I just passed 61, so I was, I had 7 of those 10. They
Jesus.
say 4 or more
Yes.
cuts it back. So I was, trying to look back, and I guess the reason I do the work that I do, we were part of an organization when we were kids that uh, provided a lot of structure and opportunity to release a lot of aggression.
Yes. Yes.
And so, I think that's one of the things that helped me. But my mom got me some help and some counseling when I was young,
Yes.
at a relatively young age. So I was able to address it at an early stage. So I was blessed not to have gone down the path of trying to medicate myself with whatever kind of substances there were.
Sure.
It hasn't been easy. I did have significant other issues that I just thought were part of my life, but in retrospect and looking back, it was all because it was definitely a response to trauma.
Yes.
Childhood trauma.
Yes.
And when you're a child going through it, you don't really have the opportunity to compare. You don't have the distance to compare your life to others, so you just assume, hey, this is normal. This is this is what's going on, and this is what's normal in my life. And then as you get older, you realize, wow, it's not normal. That explains why I responded this way. I was sleeping, problems concentrating as a child, whatever.
Yes.
So,
yes.
And then if those things aren't addressed later on, they're creating so much pain in your life. People just do a lot of things to try to correct that and to numb themselves or to, heal themselves.
In a sense, it is an escape.
In ways that can lead to more problems if it's not done with a professional's assistance.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in looking at this gentleman, some of the my patients I've worked with over the years and case studies, a lot of the challenge really was that when this was happening, there was a lot of people that really just never shared or disclosed this. And, we have a school system, pretty much to today that I know there's some good due diligence in trying to at least address it and protect it to some degree. But there's also a lot of tacit approval that kind of plays through that where, they're just letting it go by, and some of the old school ideas of, boys will be boys kind of mindset, this became a factor in a lot of kids growing up where they just kept it to themselves. They were not sharing it with parents, with anybody in the school system, and in some cases, even some of their peers, and though the peers that were aware of it or had some insight to it, they also kept quiet from it too as well, because, they were asked to generally in a lot of the cases in a sense. So let me give
a lot of times too, the training isn't there and people don't know how to address it.
Exactly.
We were talking earlier, there are some distinctions the way, I've clearly focused more on building healthy corporate cultures and reducing toxicity in the workplace and helping primarily with really healthy management leadership practices. And I've been doing that for, over 30 years.
Yes.
But, people just don't know what to do. I think a lot of people want to get involved. They say over 74% of the worker population in the United States responded in a poll that they either witnessed or experienced workplace bullying.
Wow.
And the distinction between schoolyard bullying and workplace bullying, I think both are rooted deeply in a sense of great insecurity.
Yes.
But the schoolyard bully tends to attack people that are different, that stand out. When I was a kid, I had big voice. I'm still a large person.
Yes.
I had red hair. And so, I was the size of kids that were a couple of years older than me. So that made me a target.
Yes.
And, fortunately, getting involved in sports later on sort of became a protective thing and a good thing. But, I was definitely harassed by people that were considerably older than me when I'd be to and from school or whatever. And so I think that's what the schoolyard bully is desperately afraid of being ostracized. And so any child that is any sort of different than the norm poses a great threat and triggers that schoolyard bullying, and they do whatever they can to attack that person. On the other hand, and somewhat similar is the workplace bully, who's primarily triggered by the fear of being exposed as an incompetent fraud. Yes. A lot of, the greatest bullies are people that are really not that talented, but they've gotten in their position for a variety of different reasons. And they've learned how to use power and control and attack to keep people away. But if they come across a very talented or gifted employee, or just a really decent person, that person will trigger a great sense of fear in a bully, and they'll go out of their way to really destroy or try to really undermine that person.
Wow.
That's go ahead.
Yeah,
Bernie,
very, no, not at all, man. Please. That's so I'm gonna jump on the slides here because I'm gonna kind of do through some talking points on here. And so, bullying defined. Today's bullying is tomorrow's trauma when we're dealing with kids. It really is a factor. And as Matt alluded to, a lot of the challenges are that families don't know what to do with it, and they don't know how to respond to it at all. We're going to have a couple of talking points about that. That's the same thing that we have challenges that I've been dealing with for years with addiction, is that not knowing, what do I do? How do I intervene? How do I step into this? So according to the CDC, bullying is a repeated physical, verbal, or social aggressive behavior involving an imbalance of power, as Matt alluded to earlier. Bullying can occur in a person or online and can have a lasting impact on a victim's mental and physical health. And again, Matt also alluded to the lifespan where if somebody was bullied when they were younger, that was a major factor. So the types of bullies I know of that we're going to just briefly talk a little bit about, and that is we have the ones who are just verbal, which gets a lot into the emotional. We have the physical aggression, and these are the ones that can really create some challenges, the Davy and Goliath mindset. But it's usually not necessarily always in that case, at least some of the people I've worked with in the past. It's more of a group of people against one person in a sense. And then that goes into the other element, which is the social aspect. And that's where social isolation.
It's mobbing.
Yeah.
What they call mobbing.
Yep. And that's a major, and that still is a major issue. And one of the things, and we're going to just touch it for a moment here, but I'm going to come back and we're going to get involved with talking a lot about this with the cyberbullying, because that in itself is a whole animal that we can discuss at length, because there is a lot of challenges with it. And in a post-COVID world, more so than ever, there was a lot of exposure to people that really were struggling, because now there was, you had parents at home that were watching their homeschooled kids and realizing some of these things that were going on, and they were just kind of, like shaking heads going, wait, how long has this been going on? And then to find out it had been an issue for maybe some years in a sense. So, but we're going to really discuss that at another time with it, because it's a whole animal into itself, but cyberbullying and the major impact that has on, on a person's health, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, certainly intellectually, as people going forward on their journey, it just becomes this, this stigma in a sense too. And again, the gentleman I was sharing a story with that had really a lot of challenges, and he couldn't identify with it because it was so suppressed, in his background, because it was such a horrible experience at that point of his life. And think about it, you're shutting off, a point of your life. And for his case, it was about 2.5 years. So he's really kind of almost what we call in substance use, when you have a blackout is the only time that your brain stops recording any activities. And it literally is, as it states, it's a blackout. You will not be able to recall that information at all. And this is kind of a personal subliminal blackout where they just take off those years and as if they didn't exist. And not to say that 2.5 years were strictly all just this bullying activity. There's a lot of events in life that could have happened in that too that should have been celebrated in a way. So that is a major challenge going forward. So the correlation with behavioral health and addiction. Let's go into here. Next slide. The lasting impacts are self-explanatory. We have, families and loved ones, and Matt can allude to this a little bit with the workplace bullying. There's a chance that some of these individuals may have also been bullies when they were younger. And again, they have themselves have had challenges, and we're not going to really discuss much about the actual perpetrator of this, but they also
indeed
have challenges as well, and that's why they are the way they are. Whether it's something at home,
the schoolyard bullying that is never addressed learns that they get what they want by bullying.
Absolutely.
And so what that does, it becomes a vile animal in the workplace. And they learn that, hey, throughout my life, whenever I wanted something, I've destroyed whatever's gotten in my way. I've destroyed whatever's triggered me.
Yes.
So, which is very sick approach. Bernie, I just thought I'll go through because a lot of these are related
Sure.
to,
Please.
the 10 ACEs, acute experiences that a child might experience that can contribute to them really having an undermining quality of life, and their health and well-being later on in life include physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse. Now, all those, and one of those is one of the most vile forms of bullying is sexual abuse,
Yes.
Molestation, and it's all about, as you referenced, power and control.
Yes.
It's trying to create a dynamic that's based on fear and criticism, power and control, rather than co-equal, respectful admiration, dignity. Physical neglect, emotional neglect, mental illness, divorce, substance abuse, violence against a mother, and having a relative who has been sent to jail or prison.
Yeah.
And like I said, I had 7 of those 10.
Wow.
If left untreated, children with a high ACE score, and I think, one, it's a very high correlation, but children who experience 4 or more of the ACEs are 7.4 times as likely to suffer from alcoholism and 12.2 times as likely to attempt suicide.
Yes.
And again, people with 4 or more are likely to have 20 years, live a life 20 years short than someone who has scored 0. And so, again, these are very serious issues. And if they're not addressed, or if they're suppressed and people don't learn how to share their secrets, identify cognitive distortions, where, they freeze and they compartmentalize and sort of lock that component of their life out, and then look at the behaviors that are associated with those coping mechanisms and cognitive distortions that are rooted in the secrets that they've been keeping.
Yes.
And the abuse, and then being able to choose in the minute and respond in the minute to more healthy choices, and then surrounding oneself with healthier options, healthier people, healthier plans, healthier careers. Those are all ways that people find healing and are able to overcome really significant, horrific backgrounds and traumas as a child.
Yeah, absolutely, Matt. I mean, you're certainly self-evident of that, right, alone itself, certainly. And I think that, the challenge is that a lot of the behaviors of somebody who's going through this as a young person, and, when I define child, we could be talking anywhere from somebody 5 or 6 years old through their early teens, mid-teens. It certainly happens into adulthood as well. But some of the real traumatic issues that happen at the younger age, you're not capable yet from a intellectual faculty of being able to say, hey, I got to deal with this. This could be problematic, because you're just trying to fit in as well. And that's why it's always kept kind of under the, this gentleman I'm sharing with it, he hid 2.5 years of his life because of this, as evidence of, that dealing with that trauma where it was literally almost forgotten about. And, some of the behaviors that, and I'll pull this up, some of the behaviors that we have that are part of this are that you deal with are isolation. These are kids that will absolutely start to isolate. They will start to pull away from family members and friends. And again, if they're not a very connected family, this can go under the radar very easily. They are the first that may experiment with some substance use. They might be the first ones to, with cannabis potentially, or alcohol is usually one of the first to go-tos, in addition to cannabis, because of the ease of finding it, from a parent or friend's, liquor cabinet or at home. So these are some of the things that are going on with that individual that are pulling them away from their normal behaviors. And again, if it's not a close interactive family, this goes under the radar, and to the point where, again, somebody starts growing up and they just accept it as a normal, and I mean, I kind of throw back to is this looked at because it's just, boys will be boys, this is just children will be children, and they're just starting their journeys out, and they're all, they're finding their path. I've had one person say to me, well, they're just finding their path. Well, there's a lot of ways you create a path, and certainly doing it over somebody's body is certainly not one of them, in a sense, too. So definitely one of the challenges here in dealing with coping with bullying. Anything that you've had experiences with that, Matt, dealing with the coping aspects, what you had to do when you dealt with some of your challenges?
I think, again, reiterating what you said earlier, the key distinction in bullying is the repeated intentional behavior. If it's a one-time event, it's probably going to be a fight or, just a flare up,
Sure.
and then it's not going to be repeated. Bullying is a consistent,
Yes.
horrific, in the workplace in particular, it takes on a whole different life. And it's really designed to disrupt and cause that person great harm.
Absolutely.
And damage.
Yep.
And so that, the rights of someone to go through a growth period, sort of like what you said, as compared to protecting the rights of the vulnerable and making sure they're not hurt. I think I would say it's more important to protect the well-being of a child than to encourage the expression of someone who's hurting someone.
Yes,
and I think
exactly.
That's the whole idea of smoking, and where do your rights end and my rights begin, especially when it comes to my mental health and my well-being and my safety and my security. When I was a child, I went home to walk our new puppy one time. I think I was in 4th grade, and an ambulance was in. My mom had just gone through a massive surgery to remove melanoma from her lymph system, and she was hemorrhaging. So I walked up to my house at noon just to have lunch and walk the puppy, really excited about seeing the puppy. And my grandparents' car was there. My dad was in the house, and the ambulance was in the drive.
Wow.
And I walked in, and my mom was in a gurney. And my dad threw the leash at me and he said, "Go walk the dog." Wow. And I walked the dog, and I came back, and as I was walking the dog, the ambulance went by me. And I remember my mom telling me afterwards, she said, "I told the ambulance driver not to drive by you if he could, because I didn't want that to be the last chance of us seeing, connecting." But yeah, she drove back, and the ambulance used to have the big windows in the back.
Yeah.
And our eyes just connected, and she drove off. And I was like, wow, that might be it. Wow. So I came back, sat down to eat. My grandmother, God bless her, she loved ham. She made me a ham sandwich. And I was just used to eating peanut butter. I wasn't complaining. I just said, "Can I make myself a peanut butter sandwich?" And all of a sudden, all the force of the frustration and the great fears or whatever wrapped around my father's fist, and it went to the back of my head. My face went plummeting into the sandwich. And I just left, and I went back to school. And, clearly I was marked up. And the teacher never knew anything. I think the teacher might have been an alcoholic. She was much older woman. Yeah. But she never approached me. She never. Clearly, there was a clear sign. I ran into I came home later in the day. My dad was there, and I guess they were scheduled to go to a neighbor's house for a party that night. And he said, "I want you to go over and tell the neighbor that we can't make it." And I said, "Can't you call her?" And he said, "Go over there." And I go, I didn't want. You want what's happening earlier? And so I walked over there. She sensed in me that there was something really wrong, and she comforted me. And so it was very sincere, and it was very helpful. And, I just broke down in her arms, and it was just a little boy. Sure. And it was just, the realization that you can have an impact that stayed with me to this day. That stayed with me.
Yeah. I could hear it.
Sense of hope. So,
wow.
I think a lot of people, either they don't have the opportunity. This was a whole different era, but they don't want to acknowledge. They're in denial too about that really can't be happening. I mean, God forbid. I coached at Penn State with Sandusky. I coached against Sandusky every day for 2 years, and those kids were always around. And
wow.
I never saw anything inappropriate, but all the warning signs were there.
Sure.
And I was young. So, I mean, it's just very important, I think, for us to take some ownership for the well-being of particularly the most vulnerable in our society, which are children.
Yes.
And in particular, children without families, or children with families that are really going through crisis like mine were.
Yes.
And we don't always come across as being vulnerable, right? I happened to be the biggest kid in the class, and I was a pretty good athlete, and so I didn't really look like I had many problems. But I was a vulnerable kid.
Sure. It's amazing how that can be masked. We can go through the early childhoods and something in your case sharing that you can just kind of have that masked because that's something that a lot of people go through in their journey, and it's like, well, he's fine, he's doing great, he's a football star, he's doing well, he's got everything going for him, and not having any clue, obviously, to the back end of that story too. And I like the idea where you're sharing with the Sandusky Challenge up in Penn State, and I think that really goes more to like who's the gatekeepers really for us in society in the different levels of whether it's through an academics or educational or sports.
How do we select leaders? I mean, those men were clearly flawed. They all knew
Yes.
what was going on that
Yes.
staff, and they were adulate. They were like heroes.
Yes.
And underneath, they were horrific human beings.
Yes, indeed.
That knew what was going on and were allowing it to go on. So I think our society really needs to look at the way we select and vet different, from doctors to executives to lawyers.
Sure.
Because there's been some sort of decency or integrity that's been overlooked, and people are really hurting me.
Yes. And it's self-evident today. I mean, in the challenges that we face today as a population, certainly the human species as a whole right now, is got a lot of challenges. We are a 15 minutes of fame, whoever can click on the YouTube showing whatever it is they need to become that popular, talk of the moment. In a sense, it is all popularity and not about substance. And sadly, that is absolutely in part of our leadership process too. In almost every field that you can think of, it really is for the most part, in a sense too. So one of the challenges I wanted to share with in workplace bullying that Matt is going to talk about in a minute, but for the addiction aspects of it specifically, and again, going back to the gentleman, I'm kind of case referencing with this too, a lot of these children that are dealing with these challenges, they are really the first ones who are going to experiment more frequently with a substance. And they will be able to quickly correlate that numbing, that checking out, that, the proverbial state change here, where you're making that state condition where you don't have to think and face and deal with that. And on top of that, we had an element like alcohol that throws in the stimulant and depressant simultaneously, where you can get a little bit more, empowered, as at least you think so, in a sense too. And that's really the springboard that sets off into a lot of the challenges with substance use as they get a little bit older going forward. And again, some of them know about the stories going forward. Some of them, like again, the case study I'm sharing with now, that just kind of kept it. It was in the background of their life, and they really never identified, nor did they ever work on it. And sadly to say, again, going back to kind of the gatekeeper process, you would think your parents generally should be, and it's certainly not to fault parents, because every environment has a different challenge, and and especially in today with a busy life that everyone has, there's just so much going on, there's so much stimuli happening, that these things can just slip so quickly under the radar. And again, that's why we're probably going to be talking in the near podcasts about the cyberbullying, because that, again, is a whole separate animal that really is taking on a life of its own too. So
I think in bullying too, Bernie, I think what can happen is if the parent was ever bullied,
yes,
they can get triggered, and they don't want to deal with it again.
Yes.
Even though they're saying, wow, this is the last thing I would ever want my child to experience. I will rip apart anybody that tries to bully my child. They just don't want to. They don't have the capacity or the coping to be able to say, wait, I'm an adult, I'm mature, rational, objective. This is not going to happen to my child. It may happen to me, but it's not going to happen to my child.
Yes.
I have control. And so they may just want to deny. Getting back to the substance abuse, I think a lot of that has to do with denial. It's numbing. It's your desire to just sort of remove yourself instead of substance abuse. A lot of people that have been abused as children develop phobias and OCD and those kinds of things. And those are all ways of distracting yourself, so you don't have to acknowledge that. I mean, what's happening in your life is so overwhelming. and beyond normal life experience that the psyche just doesn't have the capacity to
Correct.
comprehend all that.
Yeah. And that's a checkout.
And I think, rather than turning it internally, and then I, was driven, I wanted to try to control. And so I had this very involved process in my head that, it's really very, very caused me great amount of pain and suffering. But, it was all my way of trying to, I guess, distract myself from what reality was.
Yes.
And so I think do the same thing with substances. Now, fortunately, the residue and the remnant of that kind of OCD and mental illness can be pretty significant. But I think if you compound that, or if you, go down the road of substance abuse, that can really make things a lot more challenging, because your capacity to think and rationalize are all going to be undermined with those substances.
Yes, there's distorted.
And that becomes your specialty. That's not really my area of expertise, but I know I was just blessed not to get into that realm of coping and use substances or alcohol to try to cope with all the things in me.
Well, I'll tell you what, let's, the point I was set up here for next, I'm going to throw up this slide here. This really is, we were just discussing this, behavioral health and mental health. What does that bullying cycle do to individuals? And they find the coping mechanisms. They become and we can hit the gamut of this. This can be the individuals with the OCD. This can be the early affective disorders, a bipolar, some mania aspects of it, or the big one. And the quiet one no one really talks about is the depression. And depression can seriously go on unnoticed for a long time, because it's so easy to kind of hide and isolate in many ways, I don't
really know. You're coming back, I believe me, after I had a major growth spurt in two of the form. I was physical abuse and then sexual abuse. I was able to stop my predators when I was about in 8th grade, and I, threatened them both. And, they never touched me again. So that was an extremely empowering time for me in my life. And I was young. I was 13, 14 years old. And then that really helped me become a good student, because I was able to, concentrate. I didn't have these fears or anxieties of when and who's going to attack me. And so, but later on, when I went to college, I remember, in the middle of the day, I'd come home from class before going to football practice, and I'd take a nap, and I'd have like a huge lump in my throat. And I assumed that my mom had died my senior year in high school.
Yes.
After an courageous 8-year battle with cancer. And, I just assumed it was loneliness from her, but I had depression, and I was not addressing it. And at about the same time, I had sleep disturbance. I'd get up. I started getting up like 2:30 in the morning, and I couldn't. And that went on for about 20 years. I thought it was just part of life. And so I think it's very important for people to acknowledge or try to find out, what are the norms in sleeping, in thinking, in, how you feel. If you've been feeling this way, and I had those feelings since I was a little kid, and the abuse had started, I didn't know anything different.
That's right.
And when you do get to a healing point, and that's a beautiful thing about this, healing is always possible. You realize, wow, I've been under suffering for a long time, and now I feel pretty good.
Dang.
And everyone has the capacity to get there.
Yeah, and absolutely, the gentleman I was obviously starting this conversation with in the case study, he had exactly that kind of transcendence, in a sense, where he's really found a new spring in his step, really, but actually a new shift in his life in many ways. We're always just brand new in our day for our journey, so your life is not a culmination of your past. It's what your choices are today, and the fact that he had that freedom to be able to address it. He was set up with a trauma therapist, which I will really highly encourage anyone who's dealing with very a very severe challenge with any trauma based on bullying, or any trauma for that matter, to please get involved with a trauma therapist, a good trauma therapist, because they really can help and work you through those processes, so that you can understand how you can put that in your life and move forward, and not having that as your ball and chain in a sense too. So, and one of the other things that
I've read some controversial material recently, and I'd like to just add to that.
Sure.
Is that finding a licensed professional that's certified, I think, is real critical. A lot of because the sexual abuse is so prevalent, and
yes,
abuse and physical abuse, domestic violence is so prevalent, that a lot of places just don't have the number of counselors that they need to address the crisis. And I read an article in the paper a couple of years ago that said they were peer counselors that were helping people work through this process, and that can open up a whole can of worms. If you don't have someone who can help you properly reveal your secrets, identify those distortions that are related to those secrets,
yes,
look at those patterns, behavioral patterns that are related to the cognitive distortions, and start choosing healthier options. If you don't have a real expert to help you walk through that, it can lead to more problems.
Well, certainly.
So
I'm glad you referenced that. Peer support is a great resource as a supplement to many other things in life, but it is certainly not for trauma. And Matt, as you alluded to, most of my career has been in working in inpatient settings, and I can say from behavioral health, psychiatric doctors, one of the challenges has been having enough people to deal with these conditions, and it really is just. A lot of people are just kind of going in and out of the system because there isn't enough really qualified providers that can do and offer those services, to many individuals. And I would even emphasize, go one step past just having the license and credential. Look at reviews for somebody if you really have a challenge and you're looking at interest in doing something like this. Reviews are one of the most powerful things. It's almost your business credit report in many ways. And though one can disgruntled person can say something bad, there's a lot of numbers tell you something, and there's a correlation behind the average of all of them. And you find and I know it because I've done this with referrals for people, that you find those that have those higher credentials are the higher feedback from people outside of just their credentials that allowed them to continue to even thrive in their business. But again, it is to find that right professional when you're dealing with this too. One of the other things that I'm going to share within a second here is also a challenge that is dealt with, and that is eating disorders. And this is also another aspect of behavioral health and mental health. And sometimes this is in correlation with addiction challenges, and sometimes it stands on its own. But it is an addiction in a different, it's a process addiction really in a sense, because it's a false control of the body. And I worked in a psychiatric eating disorder group of women, and it was something that was absolutely heart-wrenching to see some of them. And one of the women who had a challenge because she was too bullied, actually from her parents as well as from some children that she had dealt with as a young person. And she was early 30s, and one of the challenges is that she actually was on dialysis at this point right now. And because she had such a challenge with this eating, she actually presented as almost like 20 years older than she really was. And I know the life expectancy with that is minimal at best in a sense. And it's really heartbreaking because, even her gatekeepers were actually part of the problem and not the solution in a sense. Please excuse this interruption as we stand by for some construction work. Actually, my wife just returned home, and our two dogs are very excited because today is Chicken Friday, and they will be receiving roasted chicken for dinner tonight. So they are very excited, and thus created a sound problem for us. Our program will continue in 1 second.
I think control is germane to all this. I think that's what the whole idea of mental health is. And I know my issues were certainly, I'd be attacked from behind, or you didn't know. So, you try to compensate by saying, how can I control this? How can I control this? And if you really can't, I started making it up in my head, and then
Yes.
or people said, well, at least I can control the beer can that I open.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
then, unfortunately, that beer can starts to control them. And
Exactly.
so, it's trying to find a healthy balance of efficacy where people feel autonomous and they feel as though they have some impact of control over their lives. I think if you listen to the news or, listen to a lot of organizations, it's all about power and control. They want to make you feel like you don't have control, right? And so they want the control. So you give them their dollars or you buy their things, or if I buy these shoes, I'm going to be in control. If I buy this watch, I'm going to be in control. It's all marketing's all based on that concept. But if you give people a good sense of their own self volition, uh, then I think a lot of this can be a lot of the bullying can be uh, undermined. But our society and the profit and greed sort of works against that. If people were really, everyone was really mentally healthy, they wouldn't have the obsessive need to eat or buy things or not eat. All these control mechanisms that they go through to try to make themselves feel like they have control, and they're being exploited by marketers or people that are selling to them. On the other, so on the one hand is, it's like the greatest threat to the defense industry in the United States is world peace.
Yeah. Isn't that the truth?
It's like
Right.
greatest threat to a lot of marketing, cosmetics, clothes, foods is mental health. If we
Yes.
do get mental health, all those industries are going to go away.
Yes. Well,
So then I guess we
yes.
start creating more mental health issues like sexual identity.
Yes.
Maybe I shouldn't get into political issues,
Sure.
but
Sure. No, I understand.
you
I know
know,
where you're coming from with that. Absolutely. Spot on with it in a sense. So the those challenges, and I tell you what, that'll kind of segue us into the, this piece here, and that is, well, what do we do about it? How can we address this for, our children, and how do we address it maybe with some adults that have already kind of gone through this and they're in that situation where they're still possibly repressing that memory, and and what are some of the things. Now I can share a little bit from the adult standpoint. There are a lot of practices. It's first and foremost is really trying to be mindful and kind of honest with yourself in many ways. Gentleman, David Goggins, who wrote a book, You Can't Hurt Me, and he'd gone through some challenges, and a pretty rugged person, because he had survived 3 sessions of Hell Week with the Navy SEALs, and he's writes extensively, and he's a marathon runner and so on. But he had one of his principles was that helped him define and turn around the traumas that he had in his life, was that he was able to face the mirror and look in the mirror and then be brutally honest with himself, truly from the core, not on an intellectual level, but from his heart, get brutally honest and accept everything that was the way it was to the best of his ability, so he could move on. And it wasn't until he got to that point in his life, and again, working with many people over the years, this really is one of the pivot points for someone, is when he can finally get honest with themselves, that they can move forward with it too. And that's where you stop the shopping, and you stop the eating, and you stop the drinking and the drug use and so on and so forth, because you start to get honest with yourself, and acceptance in many ways. Yes, and acceptance. So for children, now for children today, that's a challenge, and this will be an ongoing, obviously, conversation, because with children, it's one of the things that I have found, along with what I do professionally and even personally, is one word, and I think this word, Matt and I have talked about it before, I think is paramount to the challenges we have in everything in life. In fact, I can probably take every single issue that goes on in our world today, and I'll tie it back to this one word, and that word is communication, or lack thereof in many ways. So that alone, if we're able to develop communication, healthy communication skills with our children, with the mentors, the gatekeepers that really should be there to have those abilities, to have that communication that allows that freedom for them to feel they can express something might be going wrong or something happened to them, and they can feel comfortable with that. And that's really kind of a major key. One of the areas that we have control over today. We can make that change today. Even if you've had some distant relationships with somebody, you can start today, brand new, and begin to to understand who that person is, so they can understand you, and you open up that door for them to have the ability to share from a heart, not just the superficial stuff, in a sense. So
Another thing is, I think organizations, schools, elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, universities, and then obviously corporations, organizations around the world should have very clear processes and procedures that make it clearly understandable through example and demonstration what constitutes bullying. What does it look like in the workplace? It's often about performance. It's constant movement of targets or goals. It's a constant unfair, irrational assessment of performance. Often they're moving targets. Often the assessment or the evaluation is not agreed upon. Roles aren't clear, goals aren't clear, so everything can be very gray.
Yes.
So no one can really take accountability, but they can really manipulate. So I think the way you fight bullying is you make it very clear. It's easy to clearly define it, identify it,
yes,
then make processes very clear about what you can do in a very safe way to let people know you've either witnessed it or experienced it yourself. And then, having the processes within the organization that put a stop to it, to treat it like it's an illegal behavior.
Yes.
Because in many regards it is. It's discriminatory and it's harassment. It's creating a hostile and threatening work environment in the workplace, but in the schoolyard too. It can be considered a threat. And I think if parents are aware and they don't do anything, or if teachers are aware and they don't do anything, they can be held legally liable if anything bad happens to that child. So, I think we need to strengthen up the laws that require dignity in the workplace, but also that openly discuss and expose abusive behaviors.
Yes. Yes. And I mean, the challenge there, Matt, and I love the institutional idea of whether it's a corporation, you can take that whole institutional model and take that into the school system, and the schoolyard bullies, the school system itself, and a family in a way is an institution, in a sense. There's roles.
Schools are doing it. They are doing it now, but hesitation, I can't understand the hesitation. And often I say, well, it's because maybe the people in charge don't want to throw themselves under the bus. If they outline all these behaviors, people might be saying, hey, well, wait a second. You're doing this every day, right?
Yes.
Joe Paterno was up there telling people about bullying. Everyone in the room would say, well, you're a bully. What are you talking?
Yeah. The self accountability for some of that, the hypocrisy that can sometimes stem from that as well too. But so there is a multitude of challenges for families, but at the end of the day, it's making a decision to want to get involved in that person's life and wanting to know more about it and opening up that door to give them that opportunity. Again, whether it's childhood or whether it's an adult, it could be a partner of yours that's going through challenges. Again, I'll go back to the original statement with the case study I'm talking about now. His wife had known something was wrong, with him. And when the alcohol abuse started to get into full-on abuse, it became a dependence, and then it became the addiction. But she noticed that something was going on, and she was afraid to really confront it because she wasn't sure if she found something out, what she would do with it, in a sense too. So my thoughts are, and the encouragement is, there's plenty of people and plenty of professional systems. There's anti-bullying sites all over the internet. The government has a bully. Is it? And I can put a link in the description below. It's bully.org or bully.gov, I believe is the HTTP on that. So, but again, I'll put a link in the below with it. And they have
Yeah.
self-assessments. They have things that you can look at as a parent or as a partner, as a business executive, in a school system. That, and as Matt pointed out, the ACEs really was a phenomenal way to look at, the potential for trauma later on in life and the impact that would have on it. And you can do some of these self-assessments. There's really some great tools out there for the population to be able to do it. But it comes down to just get involved. Get involved, take the brave step and get involved. Disregard am I going to offend somebody? If there's something wrong, doing the right thing isn't always easy and it isn't always hard, but it is always right at the end of the day. So just to do the right thing. And I think we all know innately in our hearts what we should be doing and the right thing. And I think our intuition has always been powerful enough to say, hey, something seems off here. And 99% of the times you'll be right. There is something probably going on in a sense too.
You bring up another great issue, Bernie, and I think very central to a lot of abusive organizations and alcoholics and substance abusers is appearances.
Yes.
Most appearances. And so, being able to look beyond the curtain and see and say, well, something just doesn't add up.
Yes.
Something's going on. Something doesn't fit right.
Yes.
And being astute, I think, is really critical. And then understanding how, and good organizations will allow people the avenues that encourage people to shed their light and to share, what's going on so they can correct it without sensing or fearing retribution or retaliation.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I mean, and that's really the true takeaway there is that it's for us to be brave, and the more that we're brave, the more people that stand up, the more people will stand up in a sense too, and it's really kind of, at the end of the day, this is about trying to better ourselves and better our lives. And the only way we're going to do that is by impacting the other people in our lives as well. And again, if it's a family member or if this is a business associate or if it's a school related issue, whatever it is, it's really just taking that ownership to step up to it and be that better human being in a sense, that can empower that person to open up their door and eventually get the help that they need too as well. So, Matt, this has been a fantastic opportunity to meet with you and talk with you regarding for this podcast.
It's always been.
Yeah, I'm going to have Matt's information will be below in the description, as well as the links for him as well too. In addition to, we'll also have a bullying resource PDF that'll be in the link below for free that you can just quickly download, and it will have some of the content that we're talking about here today as well, and also some of the bullet points of the conversation with bullying. Matt, any parting comments at all? I do thank you once again from the bottom of my heart.
I think again, thank you, Bernie. You're doing good work, and the goal is to try to help people from an organizational and interpersonal perspective.
Yes.
If you need help with setting up organizations and tools to help people really identify, address, prevent, and transcend horrific abuse and bullying, my book can help. I'd be more than willing to help. But it's very important for people to feel as though they have a good, safe place to go.
Yes.
Where they can reveal their secrets and address things, and they're going to be helped and not hurt further.
Absolutely.
Because there's a lot of exploitation around there too. So I think you're heading in a wonderful new direction.
Yes.
Bernie.
Yeah. No, honestly, and one of the things too is to stay, not to utilize, though the internet can be a great resource and it's a tool just like any other tool, but it's just one tool. It's not all of them. And you have to do some due diligence on your part to find those professionals, to find the right resources. But usually you can find them right in your inner circle, somewhere in your group of people, your tribe. You'll certainly find some of those people that can be that person as well too, that it can at least be the starting point for you if you've been holding a lot of things in due to a challenge. Again, whether you're a young person or a family member with a young person who may be exhibiting some different behaviors right now, those again, intuition will tell you that's a red flag. If it's walks like a duck, talks like a duck, it's a duck. Rest assured, you have nothing to lose by addressing and getting into finding out what's going on. So Once again, Matt Paknis, I'm so grateful for your opportunity to share with your experience, your strength, and your hope of this for the show today. And I thank you. Matt will definitely be back because he's got a wealth of knowledge and information to share, and it's just an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. So, Matt, thank you so much once again.
Thank you, Bernie.
Welcome to Tiger Resilience Addiction Solutions for Reaching Human Potential, where we provide effective resources, assistance, and coaching for family members and their loved ones who are struggling with challenges with addiction.